The main topic of discussion for today is going to be psychopathy. We want to talk about what it is, and we want to talk about the types of psychopathy that exist. Now, the first thing I want to get out of the way here is I'm doing this show because I have brought up the concept, the idea, that there are many people who are completely resistant and are in psychological denial about the condition known as psychopathy. Now, this condition is now euphemized and has been termed sociopathy by medical professionals and healthcare professionals and mental health professionals. I feel that that's a softening of the term. They're basically the same condition, and sociopathy is simply a euphemism for the term psychopath. Some people say it more accurately describes the condition because it is someone who is basically breaking down the fabric of all of society, and it's a sociological, pathological condition. While that is true, I think it far too much de-emphasizes the psyche aspect of this disease, because the biggest problem of human psychopathy is not the first type, which we will be talking about, primary psychopathy. The biggest problem is secondary psychopathy. And as we make the distinguishment between these two different conditions, you will understand why the far larger problem in society is secondary psychopathy. Now, the denialists about this condition, people who want to try to put their head in the sand like a good new age little boy or little girl and stay in their condition of childish naivete, they don't want to believe that this condition exists at all. They don't want to believe that there is such a thing as primary psychopathy, that there is an inherent condition in humanity that is with us called primary psychopathy, and that exists from birth. This is too horrific for people to comprehend. And it's horrific for a number of reasons, which we're going to get to on this show, namely because of the implications of that fact. See, the implications that it forces one to look at and to recognize and to struggle with are far too uncomfortable for most people to deal with. So they'd rather put their head in the sand and pretend like it doesn't exist. And this is arguably more atrocious than the condition itself, the level of psychological denial that people are in, that there is a different, if you will, species with us on this planet than just what we consider regular human beings. Because regular human beings have a capacity to experience human emotion, unlike a psychopath. That is a great part of what makes us truly human, being able to feel, being able to express emotion, being able to actually feel in the physiology as we take action, the repercussion of that action that we take with or upon someone else. A psychopath does not have that capability. Let me reemphasize that. It's not that a psychopath has numbed that, a true psychopath has numbed that capability out of themselves and is just suppressed. It's not there and never was there. We're talking about primary psychopathy. Primary psychopathy differs from secondary psychopathy in that the conditions, the characteristics are there from birth and are not generated by any conditional factors. It has nothing to do with environment. It has nothing to do with worldview. It has nothing to do with how they were brought up by their parents. It has nothing to do with the influences that they were around. A primary psychopath is born with an amputated capability, namely the ability to feel. For others, they cannot feel. They cannot empathize with others. That ability is not present at all. And this is because of a degradation in the brain. It is actual brain damage. And this is one of the reasons I find it so difficult for people to believe that certain people can be born with brain damage. I mean, different brain damage conditions happen at birth. This happens all the time. Maybe conditions in the womb contribute to the malformation of certain characteristics of the brain. One thing I want to emphasize is I'm not a neuroscientist, nor am I a medical doctor, but the whole point is that I've put a great deal of study into the condition of psychopathy. And even more so than that, I have really truly sat down and wrestled with the question of why it exists at all. Why is it here? Why does this exist? And those implications are why most people want to run away from this issue and don't want to talk about it. They don't want to truly understand that humanity is not here alone. We're here with a different form of animal than us. Something that is far less than human. They see themselves as greater than human because they look at the conscience as any kind of a moral code as being something that holds them back from doing what they really want to do in life, no matter who it hurts. But the truly discerning and those who truly have some wisdom will recognize that a primary psychopath is something that has something that is, they're something that is far less than a true human being. They have an amputated capability that a true human possesses, and the psychopath lacks. It's like being born, primary psychopathy is like being born without arms. Okay, the capability to manipulate objects with hands isn't there because you don't have hands. That's it. It doesn't matter how much you want to develop it. It doesn't matter, who could show you, how to have dexterity with the hands. You don't have that physiological mechanism to engage that task at all. So a secondary psychopath is completely different than a primary psychopath. The characteristics, which we're going to list in a few moments, are the same, but they were created over time. They weren't born like that. Secondary psychopathy means you weren't born like that. You have the physiological mechanism to experience emotion, but it has been numbed out through trauma, through abuse, through conditioning, through a poisoned worldview. So we have to understand that there are two types of psychopathy, primary and secondary. And let's just look at the word psychopath so we even get a clearer definition of what it is. Psychopathy. Okay? Psyche in Greek means the mind. And one of the things I want to also tell people is I didn't prepare slides for today's show. I want to get people really to look at the ideas here, the concepts, to really deeply understand without absolutely any distraction. Perhaps I will add some slides for this show in the future and put them on the podcast to just break down some words and things like that and maybe point out the areas of the brain again to people. We've covered that extensively on the show, but perhaps I'll make a slide or two or three just as a review to go with the podcast. But to go back to what I was talking about, secondary psychopathy is a created condition created by the conditioning factors, the environmental factors that the person has undergone in their life, worldview, impressioning by other people, circumstances and events that have taken place to them in their life that have colored their conditions. But again, what we're talking about here is, if we look at it from an etymological point of view, the word psychopathy means sickness of the psyche or sickness of the mind. This is a mental condition. The word psyche in Greek means mind, and pathos in Greek. this is the word that we get pathological or pathology from. Illness, sickness. Okay? A depression of the mind. Something that has suppressed the true self, the higher self. And this is what a great deal of humanity is actually suffering from, the condition of secondary psychopathy. The numbers of secondary psychopaths are far, far, far greater, far in excess of primary psychopaths. Primary psychopaths, the number is debated amongst clinical psychologists and clinical psychiatrists. You know, the different numbers are kicked around. And some of them will push the number as high as up to 4% of the human population, which I've always felt is drastically overinflated. Drastically. I don't feel that the number of primary, or in other words, born psychopaths, and yes, there is such a thing as a born psychopath, I don't put that number as anything higher than 1%, and that's a guesstimation. What I would call a well-educated guess, but nonetheless, I wouldn't say it's definitively that number, but I would think it's something less than that. I think if it's 0.5%, that's a lot. And, you know, different people will argue the number. I don't think the number is what is important. I think the understanding of the difference between a primary and secondary psychopath is very important, and I think understanding the characteristics of a psychopath to know what we're dealing with. You have to understand what the enemy is, and yes, there is an enemy. The New Age movement that wants to tell you that these people are not the enemy of humanity are frauds and charlatans, quite frankly. Real simply, that's what these people are. These New Agers who want to tell you that, oh no, they're just ill. They're not. That has nothing to do with the problem humanity is experiencing. They don't want to admit these people are in control of humanity. They're running all of the social institutions that humanity believes in and continues to support and prop up, and they're at the highest levels of all of them. Primary psychopaths are, and they have their horde of secondary psychopaths doing their bidding. And people are still in denial of this condition and still totally ignorant of it. Excuse me, they're ignorant of it. Let's get the pronunciation of that word right. I'm going to stop using the pronunciation ignorant and totally condition myself to constantly saying they are ignorant because of the emphasis of ignore. The population who would say, oh, we don't want bad conditions here amongst humanity. You know, we want to prosper, we want to thrive, you know, we want to have true freedom, etc. These are the very people who are ignorant of the actual condition that exists in their midst. They don't want to look at it because it makes them uncomfortable. Oh, we don't want to look at the negative. God forbid. You might learn something. And you might be able to come up with a strategy to protect yourself. And you might know when it's time to actually physically rebel against captors that have no right to do what they're doing. So let's look at what a psychopath actually is. What is this condition? What is this sickness of the mind that we're talking about? This illness, this mental illness that unfortunately, while I don't want it to be the case, that's irrelevant what I want to be. All of our suffering is generated from us refusing to accept that which is and then dealing with it. It doesn't matter what I want. Of course, I don't want psychopathy to exist, but it does. It is real. It does exist in the world. And being ignorant of that fact isn't going to change the conditions that are being perpetuated by the psychopaths of this world, because they are the enemy of humanity. And this evil does exist here, and it is real, and yes, it is evil. And that's why people want to ignore it. They want to ignore it because they would have to wrestle with the one overarching, all-powerful question called why. That's the question they don't want to look at. That's the question they don't want to deal with. They don't want to look at the why. Because if you start wrestling with that question, you open up a huge can of worms, and it will extend into the things we're going to start getting into here on What on Earth is Happening. That question of why does this condition exist here with humanity at all? And we're going to enter some speculative realms in future shows. Maybe I'll have to temporarily call the show What on Earth May Very Well Be Happening. Because none of us have definitive proof about some of the speculations we may cover in the future on future shows here. Up to this point, I've dealt with facts. Things that I can confirm definitively do exist and are happening here on Earth. But when it comes to psychopathy, we're talking about something that has been with us since time immemorial, prehistory, the ancient past, the dawn of human antiquity. And a lot of that knowledge of what happened during that time period is lost to humanity because of different cataclysmic events and deliberate purgings of information that have occurred in the ancient past. So we need to get out of our ignorance when it comes to this condition. Everyone should understand this condition and its characteristics. And everyone should also have an understanding that you have a right, a natural, inherent right to defend yourself. I'm talking even about the lowercase s self in this instance, your physical self, from the influence of psychopaths and how they want to manipulate society. You have an inherent right to physically defend yourself against these animals, because that's what they are. A psychopath is not really a human being. A psychopath has all of the characteristics, as we're going to list here, as an animal. In their behavior, they are no different than any animal, any vicious, brutal animal that may attack you in the wild. So for all intents and purposes, they are not human beings. Try to rationalize that however you wish. You can go and do all the kinds of mental gymnastics that you want to just try to see these people as sick. Okay? Now, the secondary psychopath is sick. They can be reformed. And we have to continuously make this distinction. There are those that can be helped, and then there are those who are simply come into the world broken. There is a tiny fraction of people that are born like that. Now, if you didn't have their influence, if you didn't have people allowing them to grow up and not isolating them, not containing their influence, right? If there were so many people that would be willing to contain their influence because they knew about this condition and they were on guard, on vigilance, and defending against it, then these people wouldn't be such a problem. They would be negligible. Because they would be telling people, hey, do my bidding, do this, do that, and people would say, you're sick. That would be the immediate response. I know that you're sick, you're broken, you're something other than what we are. You're not really human, truly. You're just a broken computer that somehow did not get infused with the capability that other humans are infused with. And no, I'm not going to listen to one thing you have to say, because you are just the influence of evil in the world amongst us. That's it. But too many people are willing to follow them, to do their bidding, to follow their orders, to accept money in return for the evil acts that they tell people to go and commit. And so we do it to ourselves, for them. And that's done through secondary psychopaths, their horde, as I call them. the horde of the primary psychopaths who are really in control. They give orders down to their horde of other animals that have the capability of becoming human, whereas the primary psychopath does not. And they issue these commands, and then these other pseudo-animals called secondary psychopaths that just follow orders, carry out their commands, and do their evil for them. So what are the characteristics of all psychopaths, whether they be primary, meaning that they are simply born like that? Those are the actual broken computers. The body computer is broken, is damaged. They come into the world inflicted with a virus that cannot be purged from the system. That's it. And again, I don't care who's unwilling to believe that. That's the way it is, and it's the way it has been. Really, it's the way it has been since we've been here. That this tiny percentage has always existed among humanity. And again, then we get to the implication of that fact. Why? Why has there always been this influence here among us, this condition, this other species, if you will, that looks and sounds like a human being, but is not a human being? Why? We're going to talk about that. Maybe on future shows we'll address that question. That may be several shows. But let's look at what psychopathy actually is, its characteristics, the personality traits and characteristics of a psychopath, whether they be primary or secondary. A genetic psychopath, or in other words, one that is a psychopath from birth, created that way, made that way from birth, or one that has been influenced to become a psychopath, which is called secondary psychopathy, through conditions, worldview poisoning, external factors in life, buying into certain fundamental axioms and belief systems, etc. So here are the characteristics. Aggressiveness. Okay, that's number one. They are willing to engage the aggression principle, which is basically attack even if they have not been attacked. Initiation of violence, in other words, is something that they're willing to do to have their way. Callousness, total disregard for the feelings of others. Doesn't matter what amount of suffering they cause for others. They don't care. They don't care how it makes you feel. They don't care that it does harm to you. The complete absence of conscience. No conscience. Perhaps that should be better stated as the complete absence of the exercise of conscience. A psychopath may even in their own intellect know whether an action is right or wrong, but they don't care. They'll do the wrong. They'll willfully choose the wrong over the right if it means more for them, and them getting a tactical advantage and power over someone else. A complete absence of empathy. No regard for the feelings of other human beings. If they're being harmed, if they're being hurt, doesn't matter. I'll do it anyway. We're already seeing that this is a big bulk of human behavior. This can account for a whole lot of the way people act, a whole huge portion of humanity, the way they act. This is also the characteristics of just about every institution on the face of the earth that you could possibly imagine or think of. Banking, education, corporations, medical industry in many respects. They claim to be people of care, when in fact it's all about the pharmaceuticals, It's all about making as much money as we can reel in on sickness. Government. So, more characteristics of the psychopath. Cunning thinking. A very sharp, cunning intellect. Not holistic intelligence, but left brain intellect. These are intellectual people, but they're not truly intelligent. They don't have holistic intelligence because they lack the right brain aspects of consciousness. And we're going to talk about the physiological mechanisms that actually are responsible for, bringing forth these characteristics in an individual. What part of the brain is malfunctioning? What part of this body computer that we call the brain and the central nervous system and the physical body, what part of it is broken? And what conditions does that create in the personality and the psyche of the individual? Another characteristic of psychopathy is a willingness to engage in strongly immoral conduct, even criminal conduct, to get one's way. See, these are willful individuals' willingness to engage in strongly immoral and criminal conduct, if necessary. So they have intellect plus will, but what's missing is the spirit. The sacred feminine is gone. It's missing. The emotions aren't there. The emotional system, the developed emotional system of the human being. I shouldn't even say human being. In the secondary psychopath, yes, they're still a human being. The primary psychopath is, again, a different animal. You want to speculate about what that animal may be, why it may be among us, go right ahead. But the conditions are the same. They have a strong intellect, very sharp, keen, cunning intellect, and a very strong will. But the emotional development is stunted from birth. They don't have the normal range of human emotional capacity. And therefore, that makes them, for all intents and purposes, not human. It's a different species than human beings. When whatever genetic factors and conditions come together to create the material for this being in the womb, and you could even speculate perhaps womb trauma may have something to do with this, the conditions of the development of the fetus in the womb. I'm willing to open up the floor to tons of speculation when it comes to this condition. Scientists don't really know truly where psychopathy came from. But again, that problem, that speculative problem, is why so many people don't want to look at it, because they don't want to wrestle with the implications. More characteristics to be listed. The willingness to take what they want and do as they please at any time, regardless of who is hurt or who is wronged. Willingness to take what they want. Theft isn't a problem for them. They'll take your right to remain safe. They'll take your right to remain unharmed. They'll take your right not to be stolen from. They'll take your property. They'll take your rights. They'll take your freedom. They'll take your life if necessary. They're takers. A psychopath is a taker. They don't care what they have to hurt to take more. More is their only goal, because they operate in the reptilian brain. With the left brain, the left hemisphere of the neocortex totally overactive, completely chronically overengaged. Those are the only two parts of the brain that are really truly working properly in the psychopath, the R complex and the left brain. The right brain, almost nothing happening. You put a true psychopath into a high-tech brain scan, like a SPECT scan or a PET scan or something like that. You look at the right brain hemisphere. The neural activity in the right brain and in the prefrontal cortex as a whole is going to be almost non-existent or significantly diminished. And you can do this online. Go look at the brain scans of a psychopath. Maybe I'll post a couple of them with the podcast as well. You'll be amazed at how different it is from a normally functioning human being, because it's not a human being's brain. It's some other thing. It's some other animal, an automaton robot animal that looks, breathes, talks, walks like a human being, but is not a human being. And I know people will say, oh, those are strong words, Mark. You're saying that there are people here among us that aren't really human. Yes, I am. Absolutely saying that. Because it's true. These people are broken irrevocably, the primary psychopath. They aren't human, and they're never going to be human, ever, ever, ever. They cannot be reformed. There's a reason for this, and we'll get into that. We need to focus our attention on attempting to reform secondary psychopaths. And see, herein lies the problem. You have to know. You'd have to have a case history. You'd have to have examples from their youth that their parents are maybe perhaps willing to bring forward. You'd have to talk to a psychopath's parents. Were they always like this, or did they become like this over time? What kind of behavioral characteristics did they display as a child? You know what a great television series that is an allegory about all of this? It's called Dexter. I highly encourage people to watch this television show. If you don't watch any other television, download this series off of BitTorrent or Usenet or something like that and watch it. Because this is what it's all about, psychopathy. And this particular or maybe possibly not born psychopath, but one who became a secondary psychopath very young in life, decides to deal with the other psychopaths of the world. That's all I'll say. I don't want to ruin the premise for people. It's basically a serial killer who only kills other killers. That's what the show is about, based on books that were written. I believe by the author's name is Jeff Lindsay. But to go back to the characteristics of the psychopath, we have to understand that it doesn't matter to them who they hurt or wrong. They're going to continue with their actions because they have a very developed intellect and a very developed will. They're not going to back down. Psychopaths don't back down. They become like robots that are programmed to do a particular action. So do secondary psychopaths. They operate the same way. It's like a robot. You're not really, when they're still in that condition, you're not dealing with a real human being. You're dealing with an animal robot that is programmed with code, just like a computer is programmed. Getting, angry about the actual condition or ignoring it, it would be the same. It would be the equivalent of getting angry at the way a computer program actually then executes its code. Forget about getting angry with it. You got to deal with it. Either you go into the code and you change the code, or you still get the same result. And for a secondary psychopath, it is possible to change that code with enough work on the individual. Now, with a primary psychopath, at some point, yes, if we develop advanced enough technology, and we could talk about that in a little while, would it be possible to develop a mechanism for dealing with primary psychopathy? We could speculate on what that technological solution or genetic solution might look like. Okay? But I'll put that off to the side for a moment. Let's get back to the characteristics. Psychopaths all have a deceptive ability to appear to others as being benevolent, as being the good guys, as being caring. And this is what they don't want you to realize. The psychopath is only effective as long as they are concealed. They have to remain hidden. Once their work and their personality traits are brought out into the light of day, game over for them. Because then people are going to be aware of what they're truly dealing with. And unfortunately, right now, they're not. They're not aware of it. So beware of people that are, excessively charming, appearing outwardly benevolent, but really they have a hidden agenda. And they'll never tell you about this possibility, that, they'll never talk about psychopathy, They're the people who would want to ignore this most of all. Forget about bringing that forward and putting that on the table as a topic of discussion. They don't want anybody looking into this. They want this condition well concealed and hidden. And they want people to think of it only as a medical condition that is just dealt with at a, psychological or psychiatric level. When in fact, these people are not only all around us, they are in the highest levels of all worldly institutions, running things in positions of quote-unquote responsibility. But it's not responsibility, it's control. They're in positions of control. The psychopath has a deceptive ability to behave in superficially charming ways. That's what you have to keep in mind. Superficially charming ways, but that's only to get people's guards to go down so that they can continue to advance their hidden motives. They have ulterior hidden motives and agendas that they will do anything to get forward. And to make the public off guard, to take their guard down, they have to charm you. They have to make you think they're out for their self-interest. This is what all politicians do. They need to make you think you need them, most of all. They have a total willingness to use intimidation and violence to control others. That's no problem for them. We have to kill how many people in order to get our agenda through? 3,000. No problem. Do it. That's it. Just like that. Just like that. Snap of a finger. And people don't think that people like that exist in the world because they make a fundamental mistake. They try to graft on or attribute their moral sensibilities onto someone else. And you can't do that. You cannot make the erroneous and dangerous assumption that in a given situation, other people will make the moral decision that you would make. People will say, oh, they wouldn't do that. When in reality, what they're really thinking in their own mind is, I wouldn't do that. And then they're transferring that psychological transference onto another. And they're making the erroneous assumption that they wouldn't do that. And that, again, as I said at the beginning of the show, that is the naivete of a child. The naivete of an innocent child. And that's a bad form of innocence in this case. Because we need to get street smart when it comes to dealing with a psychopath. And again, the psychopaths are in control of all the institutions on the earth. Government, military, police. This is who we're talking about. They are the psychopaths. Bankers, people in education, even people in the New Age movement, alternative religions, and religious institutions themselves, covering up sex crimes for pedophiles, pederasts. They're psychopaths in religion. They're willing to violate anybody's inherent human rights. Rights? Forget rights. Your life doesn't mean anything to them. You think your rights mean anything to them? What right and wrong means nil, zilch, nothing. Because if you just go back and take note of everything I've been saying, aggressiveness, absence of conscience, absence of empathy, cunning thinking, okay, strong will, willingness to violate others with, by initiating force and violence. Every one of these things is animal behavior. Every one of these things is descriptive of how an animal behaves. And people still want to believe in their childish naivete that these people are actually human. You don't want to believe that there's another species here with us, amongst us. Again, it's pure wishful thinking. It's psychological denial. It's cognitive dissonance. And most of all, it's unhealthy, childish naivete. More characteristics. The psychopath has willingness to intentionally violate the inherent human rights of others. They have the complete absence of any sense of guilt or remorse. I mean, if they have the willingness to go and violate people's rights and even take their lives if necessary, you think they have any remorse or feel any guilt for what they do? They feel nothing. They feel nothing except the motivation to acquire more and more and more, regardless of at whose expense it may happen to be. Because that's what a reptile does. That's what an animal does. That's an animal's behavior. Not a human behavior, an animal behavior. And before we even get any further into speculation on the part of people thinking that they understand what this is not what human nature is, ladies and gentlemen. I want to emphasize that right now, but I'm going to go over that again a little bit later. This is not the nature of the human being. This may be the nature of a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of humanity, but it is not human nature, quote unquote, human nature. To think of this in that sense is such distortion and worldview poisoning and sickness of the mind itself that's what's keeping us under the control of the psychopath, is to think that's how human nature is, and that's just the way it's always going to be. And that's the thing, that line of thinking, that line of distorted reasoning is actually what allows them to keep controlling the bulk of humanity. Because people have that poisoned worldview, well, that's just the way it is, that's just human nature. No, it is not at all what human nature is. This is a condition that exists within the human genome for reasons which we can speculate on later, that happens to be present and ultimately simply needs to be dealt with. Whether we try to figure out a way to get rid of it from the genome, whether we try to figure a way to mimic human emotion through technology and use technology for the purpose of, essentially building some kind of apparatus to make these people be able to feel, and that would be a positive use of implantation of technology into the body, or using technology in such a way to, again, through algorithms and software, mimic the complexity of human emotion and then integrate that with the biophysiology of this small, tiny class of people. But again, that's, a speculation and an argument that we could talk about another time. I want to continue to focus on the characteristics. So we talked about that they have no sense of guilt or remorse at all. Zero. They don't care. They just don't care. They have no care for other people. They want other people not to care so that they can actually create this pecking order of them ruling the roost, and then all of the secondary psychopaths that they created to be like them, doing their bidding for them. Rationalization is another one of their things. Justification, in other words. They're willing to justify and rationalize away their own immoral behavior to create rights for them that don't exist in nature. Justification. Deference, psychological deference, is another one of the characteristics of this condition. That's making constant attempts to lay blame upon someone else for your own conduct. Passing the buck, so to speak. Oh, I did this because this person did that. I behave like this. Transference, deference. Psychological denial is another part of the condition of psychopathy itself. You're denying your own outright wrongdoing. Not claiming any responsibility for your own actions. That's not my fault, oh, it caused tons and tons of harm to other people and it was a direct result of what I did, but I bear no moral responsibility for it. I'm not responsible. Utter denial. Utter contemptuousness for the feelings of other beings. Contempt. They look at people with a conscience in contempt. You're lower than me. You're less than me. And you could say, hey, you're doing the same thing. Yeah, I am. I'm saying these people really are the ones without completeness. They are the ones who do truly lack something that other people have. The ability to feel. Again, they look at that as a detriment that they're pleased not to be burdened with. Oh, I'm so pleased not to be burdened with the ability to feel anything in the physiology as a result of my behavior. Therefore, I'm unrestrained. I can do whatever I want, no matter who it harms. Why wouldn't I want to be like that? That makes me better than somebody else. Wrong. It makes you infinitely less. Actually incapable of even perceiving the entire purpose of human existence, which is to develop the essence of the spirit, and that's only possible through the gift of human emotion. That's only possible through the heart. And again, I'm saying things that are going to be harsh and unapologetic and things that people do not want to deal with. They don't want to bring up, they don't want to acknowledge them, they don't want to talk about them because they're in denial themselves. The people who don't want to look at this condition are in cognitive dissonance, high-level psychological denial. And that's a mental illness in and of itself. Back to the characteristics. Pathological lying. Boy, does that sound familiar. That goes hand in hand with psychopathy. Pathological lying. Again, every one of the leaders of every institution on the face of the earth comes to mind. Politicians, people in government, people in banking, high financiers, every corporation on the face of the earth. They lie pathologically to get what they want, or to manipulate other people into doing what they want them to do. They don't care. They have no allegiance to truth, no care for the truth a bit. They'll say or do anything without concern for accuracy, without concern for truth, in order to advance their agenda. They have a totally distorted sense of the consequences of their actions. They think they can continue to do things and get away with them endlessly. The consequence for my behavior, that's rubbish. That's some religious rubbish. That's what a true psychopath thinks. When somebody is on the verge of psychopathy, secondary psychopathy, okay, primary psychopaths just think there's no consequence for anything they do. They can continue to do things and get away with them forever. That's part of their distorted logic process. But you talk to a person who's even beginning to develop secondary psychopathy, and you'll encounter that same total denial. Oh, there's no consequences for what I do. No. None whatsoever. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at the 2-minute station break at the top of the hour. We'll be right back. We'll be continuing to talk about psychopathy on the other side. Stay with us.